In a distant galaxy, far from Earth, there was a small shelter. It wasn't just any shelter. It was a place where abandoned alien children were brought in, given a safe home, and cared for. The shelter was surrounded by high walls, with technology so advanced that it seemed almost magical. Inside, it was quiet, except for the soft hum of machinery that kept everything running smoothly. The shelter's staff had seen all kinds of strange creatures come and go. Some were small and furry, while others were large and intimidating, but none were as mysterious as the girl who arrived one cold, dark day. Her name was Aria, and she was unlike any other alien child the shelter had ever taken in. She had pale, almost translucent skin, and her big purple eyes were full of sadness. Her silver hair fell around her shoulders in messy waves. The moment the shelter doors opened to admit her, the air seemed to grow heavy with an unknown tension. The staff didn't know much about her. She had been found wandering the streets of a distant planet all alone. No one knew who her parents were, or where she came from. She had no home. She wasn't from any known species, and she didn't speak a word. Among the staff was a man named Kalen, a kind-hearted individual who had worked at the shelter for years. He was the one who cared for the children most, spending long hours making sure they felt safe, loved, and protected. Kalen had seen many strange and sad cases, but nothing had ever affected him like Aria. He watched from the doorway as the staff gently placed her in a small room. She didn't resist, but her eyes seemed to speak volumes. Eyes full of fear, pain, and longing. Kalen's heart went out to her. He could sense she wasn't like the other children. There was something different about her. Something that made him feel an urgent need to protect her. As the days passed, Aria remained silent. She hardly ever moved, sitting in a corner of her room, staring at the floor. The staff tried to speak, with her offering food, toys, and blankets, but nothing seemed to work. She didn't even smile. Kalen noticed her strange behavior. She was isolated, yet he could sense that she craved something, a connection maybe. One evening, as the sun set over the shelter, Kalen sat in his small office, going over reports, when he heard soft footsteps outside the door. He looked up and saw a small figure standing in the doorway. It was Aria. She had slipped out of her room, her big eyes wide with curiosity, her hands trembling slightly. Kalen stood up and smiled softly. "Are you okay?" he asked gently, crouching down to her level. Aria didn't speak, but she nodded, slightly. She stared at him, her eyes filled with something, a mixture of fear and longing. Kalen could tell she didn't trust him yet, but there was something about her that made him feel like he needed to keep trying. The moment was brief. Aria quickly turned and walked back to her room. Kalen followed her, standing outside her door for a moment, unsure of what to do. He couldn't stop thinking about her, about the sadness that seemed to radiate from her. The next day, Kalen went to see the shelter's head administrator. "I want to adopt her," he said, his voice firm yet filled with uncertainty. "I feel like I can help her. I can give her the care she needs." The administrator looked at Kalen with a raised eyebrow. "Are you sure? Aria's situation is complicated. We don't know much about her. She's different from the others. It's not going to be easy." Kalen nodded, determination in his eyes. "I know it won't be easy, but I feel like she's lost. I can see it in her eyes. She needs someone, and I can be that person for her." After some discussion, the administrator reluctantly agreed, knowing that Kalen was one of the few people who truly cared for the children. He gave him the go-ahead to adopt Aria. That night, Kalen went to her room. He gently knocked on the door, and when she didn't respond, he entered. Aria was sitting on the bed, her eyes staring at the stars outside the window. Kalen approached her slowly, careful not to startle her. "I'm taking you with me," he said softly, his voice full of warmth. "You don't have to be alone anymore." For a moment, Aria didn't react, but then slowly she looked up at him. Her eyes were filled with confusion, but also with a glimmer of hope, a hope that had been buried for so long. Kalen offered her his hand, and after a brief hesitation, she took it. The moment their hands touched, Kaylin felt something, a strange electric energy that seemed to surge through him. It was as if he had made a promise he couldn't break. They left the shelter together, stepping into a new life. Kaylin had no idea what the future held for him and Arya, but he knew one thing for sure. He would protect her with everything he had. Little did he know, Arya was no ordinary alien girl. And what awaited them both would change the galaxy forever. After leaving the shelter, Kaylin's life took on a new, unexpected rhythm. His days were now filled with the responsibility of caring for Arya, an alien girl with a mysterious past. At first everything seemed ordinary, yet nothing about her was. The girl who had once been lost in silence now lived under his roof. And with every passing day, Kaylin noticed that she was slowly starting to change. Arya's eyes, once wide with fear and sadness, began to soften as she spent more time with him. Her movements became less rigid, though she still carried herself as if constantly on guard. Kaylin understood that trust didn't come easily for her, and he had made a silent promise to give her all the time she needed. The house was quiet, save for the sound of Kaylin's footsteps as he moved from room to room checking on her. He had given her a small room with a window that opened to a view of the stars. Sometimes she would sit by the window, her eyes fixed on the endless sky, as if waiting for something. Kaylin wasn't sure what it was, but he could tell that she was haunted by memories she didn't share. It was a soft morning when the first change happened. Kaylin had just finished his breakfast when he heard the soft clinking of something being moved. He turned to find Arya in the kitchen, her hands awkwardly gripping a cup. She didn't look at him as she poured herself some water. The sight made Kaylin stop in his tracks. It was the first time she had ventured out of her room without him calling her. In the past, she had stayed in her corner, looking at the floor and avoiding all human contact. Kaylin could see that she was nervous, but there was a subtle sense of determination in her posture. She was trying to become part of the world around her. "Arya, you're up early today," Kaylin said gently, trying not to startle her. She froze for a moment, her purple eyes wide and alert before she turned to face him. There was no smile, but there was something in the way she looked at him. Something that seemed to say, "I trust you." Kaylin walked over to her, crouching, down to her level. "Are you feeling okay?" Arya nodded, her small voice barely audible. "I'm okay." Kaylin smiled warmly. "Good. You're welcome to stay out here as long as you like. This is your home now." For a brief moment, Arya hesitated. Then, as if something inside her had shifted, she carefully placed the cup on the counter. She stepped back, a distant look in her eyes, and for a moment Kaylin thought she might say something, but she didn't. Instead, she walked out of the kitchen and into the living room, where she sat quietly on the couch, her eyes staring out the window. Kaylin watched her for a moment, feeling both proud and worried. She was getting better at being around him, but she wasn't quite ready to fully open up. Kaylin understood that her silence was not because she didn't want to communicate, but because her past had taught her to keep everything buried deep inside. That evening, as the stars filled the sky, Kaylin sat on the porch, gazing up at the vastness of space. Arya had settled into a quiet routine, but she still spent most of her time in solitude. He wondered if she was waiting for something, someone, but who and why? As the days turned into weeks, strange things started happening around the house. It began with small things, items moving on their own, lights flickering, and an odd hum filling the air. At first, Kaylin thought it was nothing, perhaps just his imagination, but the occurrences started to increase in frequency. It was as if something in the house was alive. One night, while Kaylin was preparing dinner, he heard the hum again. This time it was louder, almost vibrating the walls. He rushed to the living room to find Arya standing by the window, her hands pressed against the glass. Her eyes were wide, her breath shallow, and her entire body was tense. "Arya," Kaylin called out softly, walking toward her. She didn't respond. Instead, her eyes seemed to be locked on something in the distance, something only she could see. Kaylin followed her gaze, but the night sky was empty, There was nothing there, nothing visible to him. "Arya, what's wrong?" he asked, now, standing beside her. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder, and as soon as he did, the hum stopped. It was as if the sound had been tied to her emotions, fading the moment he touched her. She slowly turned to him, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. I don't know," she whispered, her voice trembling. It's like they're coming, I can feel them." Kaylin's heart skipped a beat. "Who?" "They want me back," Arya said, her voice barely audible. "The ones who abandoned me. They won't stop until they find me." Kaylin's stomach twisted. He had known from the beginning that Arya wasn't an ordinary child. But this was something he wasn't prepared for. He had thought her past was just something dark and painful. But now he realized that her enemies were not just people from her past. They were still hunting her. "They're coming," Arya whispered again, her voice filled with both dread and determination. Kaylin looked down at her, trying to make sense of everything. There was so much he didn't know about her. And now, it seemed like he had uncovered just the tip of the iceberg. What kind of beings were chasing her? And why? He knew without a doubt that he would do whatever it took to keep her safe. But how could he protect her from something that had the power to track her no matter where she went? "Don't worry, Arya," Kaylin said, his voice filled with resolve. "You're not alone anymore. I'll protect you. We'll figure this out together." Arya's gaze softened, and for the first time Kaylin saw a flicker of hope in her eyes. But deep inside, he knew that the worst was yet to come. Days turned into weeks, and the eerie hum that filled the air whenever Arya was near became a constant reminder that they were no longer safe. Kaylin had hoped that the unsettling sounds and strange occurrences around the house were simply his imagination, but Arya's fears were not unfounded. They weren't alone. Every day, Kaylin noticed more signs that something was wrong. Arya, once a quiet, withdrawn girl, now spent hours staring out the window, as if expecting something to appear from the vast expanse of space. She had stopped eating regularly, barely touching the meals Kaylin prepared for her. Her once luminous skin had started to lose its glow, and her eyes, which once held a trace of curiosity, now seemed filled with an unspoken dread. Kaylin could see the struggle within her. She was terrified, and whatever haunted her past was coming for her. But what exactly was it that made her so valuable, or so dangerous? One evening, after Arya had gone to bed, Kaylin stayed up late, digging through the shelter's archives. He had promised to protect her, but to do so he needed to understand what he was up against. The records were old, dusty, and filled with cryptic information. It wasn't long before he stumbled upon something that caught his attention. A series of reports about a powerful alien race, the Etherians. The name meant nothing to him at first, but as he continued reading, a chilling realization took hold of him. The Etherians were a race of beings said to possess abilities far beyond the known capabilities of any other species. They were capable of bending energy, manipulating matter, and even altering the very fabric of reality itself. But what made them truly terrifying was their near immortality. Their power was unmatched, and they were said to be a lost civilization, wiped out eons ago. Except, they weren't gone. Arya wasn't just an ordinary alien girl. She was one of the last surviving members of the Etherian race. Kaylin's heart raced as he read further. It turned out that Arya's powers were not just the result of an accident or strange biology. She was the key to unlocking the secrets of the Etherians. The report mentioned a prophecy that foretold the return of the Etherians, a time when the last of their kind would rise again, and their powers would shape the galaxy once more. Arya was that last surviving heir. But there was more. The documents detailed how the Etherians had been hunted down, one by a secretive group known only as the Shadow Syndicate. This group had existed for centuries, quietly working to eradicate the Etherians, believing that their powers were too dangerous for the universe. Aria's presence on the shelter planet had been no accident. She had been hiding for her entire life, waiting for the day when her enemies would find her. Kalen sat back, the weight of the truth crashing down on him. Aria wasn't just a girl who had been abandoned. She was a living weapon, an ancient being with powers so vast that they could change the balance of the entire galaxy, and the very people who had wiped out her kind were still out there searching for her. He needed to act fast. The Shadow Syndicate would stop at nothing to capture Aria and use her powers for their own gain. They would never let her live in peace. Kalen knew he couldn't face them alone, but he also knew that he couldn't take Aria back to the shelter, not without putting her in even greater danger. The decision was made. He had to take her off-world. Kalen spent the next few days planning their escape. He contacted an old friend, a smuggler who was known for his ability to get people out of the most dangerous situations. The smuggler's name was Jax, and he was a person Kalen trusted, someone who owed him a favor. Jax was a wild card, but he was also the only one who could help them. As the days passed, Kalen did his best to prepare Aria for what was coming. He didn't tell her everything, not yet. She didn't need to know the full truth, at least not until it was time. But he did explain that they would be leaving soon, that they couldn't stay in one place for long. He tried to comfort her, but the fear in her eyes only grew. One evening, as the two of them sat in the living room, Aria suddenly spoke. Her voice was quiet, almost as if she was speaking to herself. "They're coming," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the far corner of the room. Kalen turned, but the room was empty. "Who's coming?" Kalen asked, his voice low. "The ones who hurt me, they're already here." Before Kalen could respond, the air seemed to grow heavy. The faint humming sound returned, only it was much louder now. The room began to tremble slightly and the lights flickered. "Aria, stay close to me," Kalen said, his voice firm. But Aria was already standing, her hands raised in front of her. Kalen could feel the energy building in the air around her, a strange electric charge. She wasn't just scared, she was preparing to fight. The hum grew louder, now almost deafening. Kalen's heart pounded in his chest as he realized that the Syndicate had found them. They were closer than he'd ever imagined, and the girl he'd taken in was no ordinary child. She was the last hope of a dead civilization, and her enemies would do anything to capture her. Kalen reached for his gun, knowing that he wasn't equipped to fight whatever was coming. But there was one thing he knew for sure. He wasn't going to let them take her. "Get ready, Aria," Kalen said, his voice low and steady. "We're getting out of here." The girl's eyes locked with his, and for the first time, she nodded. Not with fear, but with determination. She wasn't just a scared child anymore. She was the last of the Etherians, and her power was about to be unleashed. The fight was about to begin, and neither of them would ever be the same again. The night had fallen, and the air was thick with tension. The sky was dark, save for the soft glow of distant stars, but inside the house everything felt like it was about to explode. Kalen had never seen Aria like this before. Her small frame was trembling, but her eyes, those once fearful, wide eyes, were now sharp with focus, as though a storm was brewing within her. Aria stood by the window, her hand pressed against the cold glass. She was still, but the hum of energy that filled the air grew louder by the second, like the sound of an impending storm. Kalen, standing in the corner of the room, couldn't help but feel a chill creeping up his spine. He had spent the last few days preparing for an escape, but it seemed like the enemies he feared had already caught up to them. The quiet was shattered by a sudden, almost imperceptible noise, a distant thud. Then another. Then a faint metallic scraping sound, too familiar to ignore. Kalen's heart raced. It wasn't just his imagination. They were here. Without warning, the front door burst open and shadowy figures poured into the room. Kalen barely had time to react before he was knocked to the ground. His gun flew out of his hand, landing across the room. He scrambled to get up, but it was too late. The figures had already surrounded him. The leader of the group, a tall, dark figure with an ominous presence, stepped forward. His eyes were cold, calculating, and filled with malice. "So we finally found you, Arya," he said in a deep, raspy voice, his words dripping with hatred. "You can't hide from us any longer." Kalen stood in front of Arya, trying to shield her with his body, though he knew the chances of survival were slim. "Stay back," he growled, trying to regain control of the situation. "You'll have to go through me first." But the leader only smirked, his lips curling into a wicked smile. "That's exactly the plan," he said. And with a swift movement, he reached out and shoved Kalen aside as if he were nothing more than a rag doll. Arya's eyes locked onto the leader, and for the first time, Kalen saw something else. Something different. Her fear had faded, replaced by an unyielding fury that burned in her gaze. The hum in the air grew louder, almost deafening now. Kalen realized that Arya was no longer the frightened girl he had taken in. She was something much more powerful. With a sudden burst of energy, Arya raised her hands. The room seemed to pulse with raw energy as the air around her crackled. The figures in the room flinched, their eyes wide with surprise, but it was too late. A wave of force shot out from her, sending the attackers flying backward like ragdolls, crashing into walls with a deafening thud. The leader was knocked off his feet but quickly recovered. He stood up, his face now a mask of fury. "You think you can stop us with this power? You're just a child," he spat, wiping blood from his lip. But Arya didn't respond. Instead, she took a step forward, her small form radiating an aura of unimaginable power. Kalen couldn't understand it. How could someone so young possess such strength? The energy she was emanating was more than just physical. It was ancient, something that had been lying dormant inside her for years, waiting for the right moment to awaken. The leader reached into his coat, pulling out a strange device, something that glowed with a faint blue light. "This will end now," he muttered, aiming it directly at Arya. It was a weapon of some kind, though Kalen couldn't tell exactly how it worked. But before he could react, the leader fired. The moment the beam hit the air, Arya flinched, and the energy around her seemed to explode in all directions, deflecting the blast with a force that sent the device flying across the room. The attackers staggered back, startled and disoriented. Kalen barely had time to process what had just happened when he heard a loud crack. A second, larger group of attackers had breached the back door. This was bad, very bad. They were surrounded. He looked back at Arya, whose expression was fierce and unwavering. It was clear she wasn't afraid anymore. Kalen, however, knew they couldn't fight forever. The enemies were too powerful, too many. They needed to get out, and fast. "Arya, we need to go now," Kalen shouted, his voice urgent. "There's no time left." But Arya didn't move. Instead, she seemed to concentrate, her hands glowing with an otherworldly light. The attackers hesitated, sensing the shift in the air. Kalen watched in awe as she raised her hands once more, her energy surging outward. The blast this time was even more powerful, the walls shaking with the force of her power. The attackers were thrown backward, crashing into furniture and walls. But the moment the energy wave stopped, Kalen knew they wouldn't stay down for long. The leader, though injured, was already getting back to his feet. "We're not going to make it, Arya," Kalen said, his voice filled with urgency. "We have to go now." But Arya's eyes met his, and for the first time, Kalen saw something new, something he hadn't expected. There was resolve in her gaze. She wasn't going to run anymore. She had been running her entire life, hiding from the people who wanted her for her power. But now, with Kalen by her side, she wasn't just a scared girl anymore. She was the last of the Etherians, and she was ready to face whatever came next. Kalen could feel the shift in the air as Arya's energy grew stronger. He realized that, whether they escaped or not, there was no going back now. This fight was only the beginning. "Come on, let's finish this," Kalen said, his voice full of determination. He wasn't going to let them take her. Not now. Not ever. Arya nodded once, and together they prepared for the final stand. The battle wasn't over, and neither of them was going to back down. The chase had begun. The tension in the air was thick, like an unseen weight pressing down on them both. Kalen and Arya stood in the living room, the walls still vibrating from the fierce battle that had taken place moments earlier. The attackers were momentarily stunned, but Kalen knew it was only a matter of time before they regrouped and came back with reinforcements. Their enemies were relentless, and no amount of power from Arya could keep them safe forever. Kalen took a deep breath, looking down at Arya, whose small frame was still radiating energy. Her pale skin glowed faintly, and her eyes, once filled with fear, now burned with an unwavering determination. She wasn't the same girl who had arrived at his shelter weeks ago. This girl, this powerful being, was the last of the Etherians, a race that had been hunted to extinction by the very people who had found them tonight. "We can't stay here much longer," Kalen said, his voice low. "We need to leave the planet. It's the only way we're going to stay ahead of them." Arya nodded, though her eyes flickered with uncertainty. Kalen knew that her past had been one of constant hiding and running. To leave her home, to abandon the only place she had known, was no small thing. But the reality of their situation was clear. They had no other choice. If they stayed, the Syndicate would eventually corner them. There were too many of them, and they would stop at nothing to capture Arya and control her powers. Kalen walked over to the table and picked up a small data pad. He had been in contact with Jax, the smuggler he had trusted for years. Jax was their only hope of getting off the planet undetected. He had connections all over the galaxy, and he owed Kalen a favor. That favor was about to come due. The data pad flickered to life, and Jax's face appeared on the screen. His scruffy face was framed by a dark background as though he was speaking from a ship's interior. He looked more serious than usual, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Kalen," Jax's voice crackled through the speaker. "What's going on? You said you needed a way off planet, but I never expected it to be this urgent." "We don't have time for explanations," Kalen replied, his voice steady. "The Syndicate found us. They're coming for Arya. I need you to get us off this planet fast." Jax's expression softened slightly. "I knew something was off when you called. Don't worry. I've got a ship ready, but we'll need to move fast. I'm sending you the coordinates now. There's a spaceport about 2 clicks from your location. You'll need to leave before they lock the system down." Kalen turned to Arya, who was standing still, her face etched with worry. She was too young for this, too innocent to be caught up in a fight for her life. But Kalen had no doubt that she was ready. He reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice gentle. Arya didn't respond immediately. She simply nodded, though her eyes remained distant. Kalen could see the weight of the decision she was carrying, the burden of her heritage. She wasn't just running away from her enemies. She was running from her past, from the responsibility that had been thrust upon her. "Let's go," Kalen said, taking her hand. They didn't waste any more time. Kalen grabbed a few essentials, a bag, a communicator, and a weapon for defense, and they made their way out the back door, avoiding the front where the enemy had entered earlier. The streets outside were dark, empty, and silent, but Kalen knew that silence in a situation like this was far from reassuring. It only meant that their enemies were watching, waiting for them to make a mistake. The two of them moved quickly, staying close to the buildings to avoid being seen. The spaceport was only a short walk away, but every step felt like an eternity. Kalen's mind raced as he thought about the possibility of being caught. If they were discovered now, they would have no chance. Arya's powers were incredible, but even she couldn't take on an entire army. As they approached the spaceport, Kalen noticed something out of place, a patrol of Syndicate soldiers moving toward the entrance. Their footsteps were silent, their movements calculated. They were looking for something, or someone. Kalen's heart skipped a beat as he realized they were searching for Arya. He turned to Arya, his eyes filled with urgency. "We can't go through the main entrance. We'll have to find another way in." Arya nodded, and without a word, she led the way to a narrow alley that ran along the side of the spaceport. Kalen followed her, his heart racing. They reached a small, hidden door at the back of the building, barely visible from the street. It was the perfect way in. Quiet, unnoticed. They slipped inside and made their way down a dark corridor. The walls were lined with old, unused equipment, and the air smelled musty and stale. Kaylin had spent years in places like this, but even so, the tension in the air was thick. They were close. Too close. After what felt like an eternity, they reached the docking bay where Jax's ship was waiting. The door was already open, and Jax stood at the entrance, a cigarette dangling from his lips. He didn't waste any time with pleasantries. "Get on now," he barked, his tone urgent. "We don't have long before the whole damn planet's locked down." Kaylin and Arya rushed aboard, and Jax immediately began to power up the ship. Kaylin took one last look at the planet below. It had been his home for so long, but now it was nothing more than a distant memory. The past was behind them, and the future was uncertain. The ship's engines roared to life as it lifted off the ground, soaring into the sky. Kaylin strapped himself into a seat next to Arya, who sat quietly, staring out the window. He could sense her unease, the weight of everything they had left behind, but there was no turning back now. They were on the run, and the galaxy was a dangerous place for those who didn't fit the mold. "Where are we going?" Arya asked, her voice barely a whisper. Kaylin looked at her, his face set in determination. "Wherever we need to go. We'll figure it out together." Jax's voice came over the intercom. "Hold on tight. We've got company." Kaylin's heart sank. He knew that they wouldn't be free for long. The syndicate was relentless, and they had just begun to chase them down. The chase had only just started, and this time there was no escape. The stars outside the ship's viewport shimmered like distant promises, but within the cramped quarters of the small cargo hold, the air felt anything but reassuring. Kaylin's heart had not settled since they had left the planet. Every turn, every sudden movement seemed like the prelude to an ambush. The ship's engines hummed steadily, but that hum now felt more like the ticking of a clock, a reminder that time was running out. Arya sat near the back of the cargo hold, her small hands clutching the seat as she stared out the viewport. Her gaze was distant, almost empty, as if the weight of her past was far too heavy to carry. Kaylin had done his best to comfort her during the escape, but the fear in her eyes hadn't dissipated. He knew the truth now. She wasn't just a victim. She was a beacon of power that others would stop at nothing to control. The journey was far from over. They needed to get to a place where they could regroup, somewhere far enough from the syndicate's reach. Kaylin had made plans, but plans always had a way of unraveling, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. "We're heading toward the outskirts of the Tarsus system." Jax's voice crackled through the comms from the cockpit. "I've got a contact there who owes me a favor. We'll hide out there until things cool down." Kaylin nodded but kept his thoughts to himself. He trusted Jax, at least to a certain extent, but there was always that lingering doubt in the back of his mind. They had been friends for years, but trust could be a fragile thing in their line of work. Jax was a smuggler, after all, and smuggling often came with deals that weren't as clean as they seemed. "How long until we get there?" Kaylin asked, walking toward the cockpit. "Couple of hours, don't worry, we're on the quiet side of the system, no one should be able to track us." But Kaylin couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The closer they got to safety, the more uneasy he became. The shadows of their past weren't just lurking, they were closing in, getting closer with every passing minute. As the hours passed, Arya didn't move much. She seemed locked in her own world, her eyes unfocused, but Kaylin could feel her tension building. Something inside her was restless, and he knew that it wasn't just the danger they were facing. It was something else, something far deeper. When the ship finally entered the Tarsus system, the sudden change in the hum of the engine snapped Kaylin back to the present. He looked up, finding Jax sitting in the cockpit, looking a little too calm for Kaylin's liking. "Almost there," Jax said, his hands moving fluidly over the controls, but Kaylin's instincts were screaming at him. "Jax," he said slowly, stepping closer, his voice low. "You've been too calm, too collected. What's really going on?" Jax glanced up at him, his face unreadable. "What are you talking about? We're just getting to a safe place." Kalen didn't move. His eyes narrowed. "You're hiding something." Before Jax could respond, the ship jolted violently, throwing Kalen against the bulkhead. Arya screamed, her voice cracking in the sudden chaos. Kalen's heart skipped a beat as the lights flickered and alarms blared. "Hold on," Jax yelled from the cockpit, his voice strained. Kalen struggled to regain his footing and dashed toward the front of the ship. He had no idea what was happening, but he knew it wasn't good. As he reached the cockpit, he saw Jax looking at the readout with a mixture of disbelief and fury. "The hell are we under attack?" Kalen demanded, gripping the edge of the console. "Not quite," Jax muttered under his breath. "We've been tracked." Kalen's blood ran cold. The Syndicate had found them, but it was worse than that. A quick glance at the tactical readout revealed that there wasn't just one ship closing in. They were surrounded. The ship's comms crackled, and a voice, cold and mechanical, came through the speakers. "This is Captain Krovac of the Syndicate. Surrender the Etherean girl or we will be forced to destroy your ship. You have 10 minutes. Kalen felt his stomach twist. They were out of options. They could run, but it was clear they wouldn't escape. The Syndicate had been watching them, waiting for the right moment. And now, it seemed, the right moment had arrived. Kalen looked over at Jax, his mind racing. "We need to get out of here now. We need to jump. We can't outrun them." But Jax didn't move. His face had gone pale, his hands frozen on the controls. "What's going on, Jax?" Kalen demanded, his voice rising. "Tell me." Jax hesitated for a moment, and then his shoulders slumped in defeat. I didn't mean for it to go this far." Kalen's eyes widened. "What the hell does that mean?" Jax slowly turned to face him, his expression one of regret. "The Syndicate, they knew you were coming to me. They paid me to deliver you to them, Kalen." The words hit Kalen like a physical blow. He couldn't believe it. All this time, all the trust he had placed in Jax had been for nothing. You betrayed us?" Kalen's voice was barely above a whisper, the shock and anger overwhelming him. "I didn't know it was going to get this far," Jax stammered. "I thought I could help you escape, but they knew about Arya. I thought I was just getting paid for a transport job, but when they told me who she really was, it was too late. I couldn't back out. I'm sorry, Kalen, I didn't want this." Arya's voice came from behind them, soft and broken. "You sold me out," she whispered. Her voice was filled with pain, but also a strange understanding, as if she had known this moment was coming for a long time. Kalen stood frozen, unable to move. His mind was in turmoil. The person he had trusted most in this mission, the person who had promised to help them, had just betrayed them in the worst way possible. The Syndicate was closing in, and now it seemed they had no one to turn to. The only people Kalen could rely on were the ones who had come to hate him the most. As the countdown on the ship's display ticked closer to 0, Kalen knew they had only one choice left. The galaxy was vast, and the chase was far from over. But this betrayal, it seemed, had just opened a new chapter in the fight for Arya's survival. The escape was far from simple, but one thing was certain. Kalen wasn't going down without a fight. The cold steel of the ship hummed around them like a constant reminder of the danger closing in. Kalen stood in front of the cockpit, his hands clenched into fists, the weight of betrayal pressing down on him. Jax had just revealed the truth, a truth so bitter, it left a raw sting in his chest. He had been played. The Syndicate had known about Arya from the very beginning, and Kalen had walked right into their trap. His mission to protect her, to keep her safe, had been nothing more than a pawn in a game that was far bigger than he had ever anticipated. And now, as the Syndicate's ships loomed on the other side of the viewport, Kalen realized something he hadn't truly understood before. This wasn't just about running anymore. This was about survival, and about protecting Arya at all costs. Kalen turned slowly to face her. Arya had been quiet since Jax's confession, her small form curled up in one of the corner chairs, her eyes distant. She wasn't just a scared, alien girl anymore. She was a force of nature, the last of a powerful and nearly extinct species. Her gaze lifted to meet his, and for the first time in days, there was clarity in her eyes. There was no fear, no hesitation, just a quiet resolve. Kaylin knew then that Arya had made her choice, just as he had to make his. "Are you ready?" Kaylin asked softly, though he already knew the answer. He wasn't asking about the escape plan. He wasn't even asking about the danger they were facing. He was asking if she was ready to face what she had been born to do. Arya nodded, her voice steady. "I am." The realization hit him like a bolt of lightning. Arya had always known what was at stake. She had been running her whole life, hiding from the truth of her power, but now she was no longer willing to hide. Her purpose had always been buried deep within her, waiting for the right moment to emerge. And that moment was now. Kaylin swallowed, the weight of his own decision bearing down on him. He had promised to protect her, but how could he protect her from the truth? How could he protect her from the universe that was hunting her, using her powers as a weapon? The only choice he had left was to stand beside her, no matter the consequences. He reached out, offering his hand to her. "Then let's end this, together." Arya stood up slowly, taking his hand, and the two of them walked toward the cockpit, where Jax was sitting at the controls, his face a mixture of guilt and nervous anticipation. The Syndicate's ships were now on their tail, closing in fast. "We've got maybe 15 minutes before they catch up," Jax said, his voice strained. "But I don't think I can outrun them anymore. They'll bring us down, and then it's over." Kaylin's mind raced. 15 minutes. That was all they had. It was a small window, but it was the only chance they were going to get. He could feel the fear in his chest, the tightness in his throat. But there was something else there too, something he hadn't expected. It was determination, a desire to end this, once and for all. "You've already betrayed us, Jax," Kaylin said, his voice cold. "There's no going back for you now. You can either help us or get out of our way." Jax flinched at the harshness in Kaylin's voice, but he didn't argue. He turned back to the controls and began to make the necessary adjustments. "You want to fight back, huh?" he muttered under his breath. "I'll help you, but don't expect any miracles." Kaylin wasn't looking for miracles. He was looking for a way out, a way to give Arya a fighting chance. The Syndicate might have thought they had her cornered, but they had no idea what they were truly up against. "Get us to the asteroid belt," Kaylin ordered, his voice firm. "We'll use the debris to hide our trail. It's our best shot." Jax nodded, punching in the coordinates. As the ship's engines roared to life, Kaylin took a deep breath, his mind now focused entirely on the task at hand. They couldn't afford to make a mistake. If they did, they wouldn't survive this. Arya stepped up beside him, her hand still gripping his. The power that had been dormant inside her for so long was now awakening, and Kaylin could feel it. The very air around them seemed to vibrate with energy. She wasn't just a girl anymore, she was the last of the Etherians, and she was ready to reclaim her fate. "We're not running anymore," Kaylin whispered to her, more to himself than to her. Arya's eyes were fixed on the viewport, her gaze hard and unwavering. "We're not," she replied softly. "We'll end this now." With that, the ship plunged into the asteroid belt, weaving in and out of massive floating rocks. Kaylin could hear the hum of the engines as they accelerated, trying to evade their pursuers. Behind them, the Syndicate's ships followed, their engines roaring like angry beasts. Kaylin knew they wouldn't be able to keep this up forever. The only way to survive now was to fight. Arya stood up from her seat and moved toward the small control panel that controlled the ship's weapon systems. Kaylin knew what she was doing, but he didn't stop her. He had always wanted to protect her, but now she was the one who needed to protect them both. "Arya," he called, his voice full of concern. "You don't have to." But she interrupted him, her voice calm and steady. "Yes, I do." In that moment, Kaylin saw the girl who had once been a scared, silent child turn into a warrior. Her hands moved with precision as she powered up the ship's weapons, her energy flowing through the systems, syncing with the ship's technology like it was second nature. The hum of the ship shifted, becoming a low, resonant pulse. Behind them, the Syndicate's ships were closing in, their weapons powered up and ready to fire. Kaylin could see them now, looming just outside the asteroid field, ready to make their move. He knew this was their last chance. If they didn't strike now, they would never get another opportunity. Aria's eyes locked with his, a final, unspoken understanding passing between them. She wasn't just the last of the Etherians. She was the one who would change everything, and she wasn't afraid anymore. With a single command, Aria unleashed the ship's full power, a brilliant burst of energy that surged through the asteroid field, slamming into the Syndicate's ships like a tidal wave. The impact was deafening, and Kaylin felt the ship shake as the debris and blasts filled the space around them. The Syndicate's forces were thrown into chaos, their ships scattering in all directions, trying to recover from the devastating blow. But they were no match for the raw, untamed power that Aria had unleashed. The Etherian girl had made her choice, and now the galaxy would never be the same. As the last of the enemy ships limped away, Kaylin turned to Aria. She was breathing heavily, her face pale but resolute. The battle was won for now, but he knew that this was just the beginning. "There's more to come," Kaylin said, his voice steady. "But for now, we've survived." Aria looked at him, her eyes filled with something new. Hope. "We will," she whispered. "We'll fight together." And together, they would.